Hi, this is Justin Hibbard, and thank you for tuning into Why Catholic, my podcast about the what and why of Catholicism. While typically I record episodes about topics related to Catholic apologetics, between each series I like to interview someone who is living out their Catholic faith in a unique way. For those of you that may not be familiar with my story, I was an evangelical pastor for a number of years, and because I was bivocational, meaning the church couldn't afford to pay me full time, I also worked as a K-12 educator. For 5 of those years, I worked at a Catholic school. I always felt a little awkward and out of place, me, a Protestant pastor working in a Catholic environment. Well, during my last year there, I met Katherine Mosco, who now is Katherine Mosco Depfer. She was this bubbly young theology teacher and just the nicest person to me. We've kept in touch via social media over the years, and she's gotten to watch my conversion to Catholicism and has periodically chimed in and cheered me on along the way. Recently, I made it back to my hometown in Maryland and got to meet up with Katherine in person. It's been over a decade, and I got to hear her story, how she grew up Catholic, walked away from her faith, and then had a dramatic reversion. And I was like, Katherine, you need to come share your story on Why Catholic. I think it will especially speak to parents and teens around the world. So today I'm delighted to share this interview with Katherine Mosco Depfer here on Why Catholic. Just a quick note, we had a few connection issues at the beginning of this episode, so if you hear her cutting in and out, that's only the case for the first part of this interview. And if you're listening to this interview, know that you can also find it on the Why Catholic YouTube channel. Link is in the show notes. Without further ado, here's my interview with Katherine Mosco Depfer. Katherine, thank you so much for joining me today on Why Catholic. It is a pleasure to see you again and have you on here.
Thanks, Justin. I'm very excited. And I have to say, I'm a huge fan of your podcast. I also want to say I was a huge fan of your podcast before Why Catholic. Politics in Plain English was that
Ah,
what it was
okay.
called?
Yes.
Um, and I want to tell you, I was a fan of them, that and this one for the same reason. Taking all these topics that can be bringing it to an accessible level for any learner, any theologian, anyone who's interested in any of these topics, no matter their denomination. So it's hard to do in an authentic way, and you crush it. So I'm just excited to be here.
Oh, that means the world to me, especially coming from you. So thank you so much. Well, Katherine, I want to jump right into your story. I did not know a lot of the details. I had met you when we were working at Spalding together. You were a theology teacher or working in the religion department as a teacher, and I was an ed tech director, and I was a Protestant at the time. And then came across you with this bubbly personality but I didn't know a lot of the things that had been going on. So I'd just like to take a step back and have you walk me through some of your story and especially how you got to this reversion and who you are today.
Sure. It's interesting because when people meet me now and I share glimpses or a story here and there, they're like, are you talking about the same person? Like that was you. And I'm just like, yeah, it's an interesting life. And if I were ever to write a book, it would be about my life because I have experienced things um, that are truly profound in a faith way in my Catholicism, but also profound in the way of the world. And so it's interesting to just kind of like journey through this, and sharing my testimony is a huge part of what I believe my vocation is. Testimonies are beautiful in many ways, and I love them for a bunch of reasons. But I think when we share our story about how God has worked in our life, when we share situations or circumstances, people who listen, there's wisdom that comes with that, and also maybe foresight where it's like, okay, I might find myself in a situation, or you listen to a testimony and you find yourself in that situation years down the road and you're like, I've actually thought about this, or I have this tidbit of information from this speaker's story, or this tidbit of information from someone I know at church, or a podcast I listen to, and you can be more informed in making decisions that ultimately you might not think you will ever have to make. So testimonies are huge, and I'm happy to share mine. So like you said, we met in 2013, and I specifically remember meeting you and being like, a real life genius. Like, whoa. And it's funny because you were all things technology. I don't even know what your title was. And it was my first year teaching. And any first year teacher knows, like, you don't breathe your first year. You don't look up. You're like, I am so overwhelmed with everything. And so we didn't cross paths a lot, but the few times I did, it's like, this person is brilliant, right? And I knew you weren't Catholic, even though that's weird to like remember. But I specifically, I don't know if someone told me that or if you were pretty outspoken about not being Catholic, but I remember you not being Catholic. And I was like, that's cool. Like, we're all on our journey, right? And look at you now. But in 2013, so that was my first year teaching. I think you left the next year, right? So
Yeah,
we,
2014 is,
or
yeah.
yes, so we only overlapped for a short amount of time. But I do very much remember you. I stayed there until 2018 and I worked as a theology teacher, right? So a theology teacher for 5 years. And in the summers, I would do my theology coursework for my master's in theology from University of Notre Dame. So I would work all year, go out to South Bend, study all summer. And it was incredible. So I did a big chunk of time there as a theology teacher. Then I left in 2018 to get married and then do my second master's in education from Harvard, which was incredible. Ended
So
up coming back in
let's just
2021 part
pause.
time.
Let's just pause for a second and
Yeah.
say masters in at Notre Dame, masters at Harvard. I think I'm the one looking at the brilliant person here.
Well, thank you. Now I'm a full time mom, and we look at my degrees on the wall, and we just great. But we're doing something with them, I promise. So
But
I ended up
being a
coming back.
mom is being a
Yeah,
mom is
mom. Honestly,
most important.
it's 1 million times harder than anything I've done, any class I've ever taken, any degree I've ever like one. There's no words. There's no words. Um, so I ended up going part time in 2021, and then after the birth of my second son, I left the classroom. Usually, when sharing my story, I just kind of lump that all together and say I was a theology teacher for almost a decade, right? And so starting there, we can work our way backwards on my upbringing and all that. But that's where I am now, home after 10 years of the theology classroom. I do a lot of ministry work. I'm married to a very Catholic man who also has his master's in theology and moral theology from Holy Apostles Seminary in Connecticut, I want to say. So as you can see, our bookshelf is just full of theology. It's our thing, and we like that it's our thing. So linearly, like that's where I ended up. Now, if we go back to upbringing and all that stuff, I'm from the Baltimore area. I grew up in a little town outside of Baltimore, about 15 minutes away, Pasadena, K through 8 school. I was active in my faith. My parents got us baptized, did First Holy Communion, went to a Catholic high school, Spalding. So that is my alma mater as well. Active in youth ministry. I did, retreats and camps, Catholic Heart Work Camp. It all makes sense if we pause my life at 16 years old and then fast forward to like 23. There's a through line there and it makes sense. It's like, wow, she was raised Catholic and brought up in the church, and she has this great background of active in the church and active with her peers and Catholic education. I mean, even through my undergrad and master's, it was Catholic education, right? And then you become a theology teacher and you're now speaking at churches on the weekends and leading young adult groups. It makes sense. But there's a huge gap in there. And that's the gap that people really don't know. When we had lunch, you're like, whoa, where turning away from God was my MO. Like turning away from grace, all the grace that was given to me through those sacraments as a child, through the religious education, like I didn't want it anymore. And it's really hard now as a parent and as a spouse and as just a human in this world, and as a practicing Catholic, to look back and be like, that was me. And we'll get more into, that time period. But yeah, as far as upbringing goes, it's the classic story that I think a lot of people relate to, where it's like, why would you ever leave? Like, my parents did everything right. And like, kudos to them, because ultimately I did come back to what they taught me. And I want to be very clear on kind of like my upbringing when it comes to faith. We were culturally Catholic, like in every sense of the word, Italian family, mass every Sunday. But there was never any discussion or really digging into what we believed, from my parents' point of view. They were doing what they knew, and I will defend them. Like, they were raised this way, right? So we often parent how we were parented. And I love and adore my parents, and they did an incredible job raising us, right? And I speak so highly of them, and even they watch my kids all the time. They're still in my life. I'm so lucky. And they did what they knew, right? They come from a really small kind of nook of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, right on the Allegheny River. It's called Morningside, and I promise this is relevant. And it's like a 7x7 grid, right? So it's this like tiny little kind of I don't know, what are they called, boroughs, or like, I don't know, a little like neighborhood, right? And it had its own identity, and they were all immigrants. They were all Italian or Polish immigrants. The whole little town of Morningside. My parents could name every family and every house in that 7-block radius, and right in the middle was the church and the school, St. Raphael's. Everyone went to that church and that school. The whole community was dictated by, what the social events were, what the church was doing that weekend. And every, family had their kids in different grades, and they would hang out on the weekend. I mean, it seemed incredible. And I love when they tell us stories, but I know, knowing my grandparents, they never came home from Catholic school and they're like, what do you think about Jesus? Like, what did you learn in class today? Like, how do you feel about getting confirmed? Like, it just was part of the culture, right? You went to St. Raphael's, and then if you're a guy, you went to Central Catholic. If you were a girl, you went to, it's called Oakland Catholic now. I think the name's changed. But for my parents' experience, there was no kind of pushback, right? There was no challenge. It's just who they were. And we were raised in our Catholic bubble. And even though I went to Catholic school my entire life, I was never challenged on what I actually believed. And I have termed this something, right? So like, I have come up with a term for this.
Can't wait to hear.
And okay, so stay with me.
I'm with you.
It's called the Catholic heap, right?
Heap.
And it's this just mountain of knowledge in your brain somewhere, or just words, really. This heap of that you would have to like sift through. It's like, okay, I know the event of the Annunciation in Scripture, but never once have I tied that into who I am or salvation history in general. I know, the major saints, could give some good facts. Okay. What does that have to do with me? Right. Or the Catholic heap would be, mass. Ooh, I never understood the importance of mass. I hated going on Sundays. I didn't even, if you would have asked me, I wouldn't even have said the Eucharist was the most important part, because it was never really emphasized in like our family. It was just like, yeah, we got to go to church, and you say hi to your friends, and then maybe you go to lunch afterwards. Or so I knew when to stand, I knew when to sit, I knew when to kneel, I knew the prayers, but I never let any of that become internalized in a way where it changed me, right? Where the truth of the faith meant something. I remember in maybe eighth grade, what was it? Maybe when did I get confirmed? Like freshman, sophomore year. Our teacher like pointed to the crucifix and was like, that was for you, or something like that, right? And I was like, that was like 2,000 years ago. Like, what does it really have to do with me, right? And it's like, I never said that out loud, right? And even if I did think it, I wasn't going to go home and be like, Mom, Dad, what does the crucifix have to do with me? Because it wouldn't have come up, right? And so this Catholic heap that I refer to is what I think a lot of people leave the church because, and it's this not proper scaffolding. And I think we've kind of talked about that, of knowledge. Yes, going through the grade levels, it gets a little bit more difficult, but if we don't understand the basics, like, you're not going to be able to tie in the more complex or intricate, and all of it is the mystery of faith, right? So there's so much that the church offers, and there's so much literature out there, right? And something like the catechism, which is just chilling right here. The catechism, I didn't even know what that was until I became a theology teacher. And now they have youth catechisms, right? Like for all ages, where if you're really interested in knowing what the church teaches, it's right there, right? And so all these things that were kind of pushed to the side for 16, 17 years of my life, they started accumulating, right? And ultimately, I guess Socrates was like, an unexamined life is not worth living, and an unexamined faith, it's not worth having, right? And so when I graduated high school and I found myself 4 hours away from home in a new city with new people, no one telling me I had to pray, or no one telling me I had to go to church, like, I wasn't going to do it, right?
So
I tasted, yeah, okay, yeah,
let me interrupt
sure.
you for just a
Sorry,
second, because
I get pumped. Like,
no, it's okay. This is great. I did not grow up Catholic, and so I'm always sort of like, I want to kind of get into your mind as to, like, so take me back to teenager Catholic.
mm,
And what did you think about things like the sacrament of of reconciliation, or the sacrament of
mm,
confirmation? Like, did it, was it just like a rite of passage? Is this something we do? Was there any kind of like, I'm always I'm struck by how many people go through confirmation and have no idea what it is. So
right.
I'd love to
Right.
pick your brain.
So I use the term culturally Catholic there a little bit, and I like to pin that against like an integrated, theologically Catholic, which that's like a lot. It's a big mouthful for a family lifestyle, like an theologically Catholic family versus culturally Catholic. I did not realize that there were not Catholic people until high school. And it's not, because sometimes it just doesn't come up, right? So when I went to like soccer practice, where it was, a mix of all the kids my age, in my head, they had to be Catholic, right? Like, because like that, everyone I know is Catholic, and it wasn't anyone's fault there. Like, it's just you're in Catholic circles, right? Even in school, now being a teacher, some of those kids at that school weren't Catholic, but I would have never known that, because in my head, well, we're at a Catholic school, everyone's Catholic here, right? It never crossed my mind that, like, my culture, and that comes from just growing up, my culture wasn't everybody else's culture, right? So when it comes to things like the sacrament of reconciliation or the sacrament of confirmation, I thought everyone was doing that, right? Like, I thought that that's just the way the world worked. And that's a little bit of ignorance, but also you're a child, right? Like, you receive your first reconciliation before you get first Holy Communion. You're 8 years old. And so when you're 8, you don't really have a worldview yet. It's, you just are what you know. And so when it came to things like that, I was just like, oh, I know that, my sins are forgiven. Great. Like, I want that, of course. And as an 8-year-old, yeah, sure. Um, I knew that confirmation, you receive special graces. I don't remember anything in my sacramental prep, which is really sad. I don't remember a single theology teacher from my high school years, which is really sad. I don't remember, like, it's like there was no impact there. I did not have someone that I had as a child that I looked up to as a role model of faith, and I was like, I want to be just like them. Or our parish priest was great. I'm sure he was great. I don't even remember. Like, that's like, like, I'm just like, it's no, I do remember Our Lady of the Chesapeake. He was awesome. But we went to a few different churches growing up. So it's just one of those things where I didn't think about it. I didn't think about it because I thought it was just, part of life. And just like you would be, applying to high school in 8th grade, you would be going through the sacrament of confirmation the following year. Like, it all was the same to me. There was no differentiation between, my Catholicity and just like who I was. It was all just kind of one thing that was never analyzed. the sense of self or like doing any type of reflection, again, that comes with age. So like I can't say, oh wow, I really never reflected on who I was at 10. Like what 10-year-old does that? Right. And so now as a parent, I'm all about reflective practices. It's like, okay, how was your day? Where did you find joy? How did you help someone else? How did that make you feel? Where did we struggle? Do we need to say sorry? And just starting that now, right? Because I don't think I don't know. I just don't remember doing any self-reflection. So yeah, when it comes to like what did I think of all that, it was just part of life. Part of
Hmm.
life. And I have written like letters from freshman retreat, senior retreat from high school, where you write a letter to yourself and it's very vague, but it is like, I believe in God, right? But I could tell it's regurgitation of that Catholic heat. Like it's just, and it was, yeah, I believe in God because everyone believes in God, right? Like I hadn't met someone that didn't believe in God at that point. So it's like, why wouldn't I? Like, that's weird. So when I say challenge, like I was never faced with someone being like, what do you believe? Right. Because everyone believed the same thing. So if you're never challenged or you're never doubting, like, so I think doubt is such an important part of belief. Like being challenged on your faith makes you able to articulate it better. So when we don't challenge our young people, are we really helping them? Right. So if we want to have our kid have faith, like put them in situations that they're going to be challenged, right? And give them the tools to work through that, right? Make sure that they are well versed in the faith enough to speak about it in an intellectual way. And I think of your kids, but we don't have to get into that. I love the story you told me at lunch and their ability to articulate the faith. I think that's amazing, and I hope my kids do that, right? So
Yeah, so sometimes there's always the glimmer of hope as a parent, right? Like
please turn out okay. Like
um if you could go back and maybe this is a question more a little bit later, but if you could go back and say, okay, and maybe give advice to your teachers or to your parents, how would you say like this is the way you need to catechize Catherine? What would you say?
man, I want to say what I say to my students. And I know it's not answering your question, and I will answer your question. But I always, at some point in my time with teenagers, after there's a relationship established, right? Usually in the last couple of weeks or months of school, I will pause and I will share parts of my story, not all of it, because they don't really need to know the nitty gritty. Um, but they can tell through the whole semester that my teaching comes from a place of experience. And I've even read that on my reviews and stuff. It's like it's really authentic because she can relate to many of us who don't believe. She can relate to many of us who are struggling with our faith. Um, some of the students I keep in touch with the most and have the best relationships were my atheist students, and I'm like, checks out, right? Because I can be in their shoes, right? And away from God to the point where it's like I am an atheist. So I would stand in front of them and I would be vulnerable, and it was always well received once that relationship was formed. So it took a long time to get to that place, and it's hard to step into a new environment when the relationship is not established to be like, you should listen to me. Like no, like especially with young people, especially with teens, they need to know you, right, and trust you before they take what you say and really take it to heart. And I'd say, like, I wish someone that I cared about, that was an adult, that had life experience, I wish they would have taken me by the shoulders, right? Shake me and say, the world is going to lie to you. The world is already lying to you, right? Social media is already lying to you. You do not have to chase after the nicest car, that top college that you hope to get into just to say you got into. Like, you do not need those things, right? You do not need that number in your bank account. You do not need that weight on the scale, right? You do not need those things to be happy. Society holds a standard for young people that is absolutely disgusting. And it breaks my heart when these kids are in front of me, and I see they're just desiring to be loved and to love themselves. And they're looking for it in the wrong places, on how many views their TikTok got and how many followers they have on Instagram and how many likes they get in their, beach pictures. And I'm just like, and I was that, right? Like that, I was searching for that fulfillment in from the world by doing things, and the hole just kept getting bigger, right? And I tell my kids that, I'm like, I promise you, the more you fill yourself with the things of this world that you think is going to make you happy, the more you're going to want, the more you're going to desire, and that threshold is just going to keep getting higher and higher, right? Until we take a step back and we realize, what are we really longing for, right? And where does the source of that come from? And at the end of the day, I'm like, God is real. Holy moly. Like, please listen to me. Do not throw this away for the sake of chasing something that is man-made, right? For the sake of chasing something that can be discarded in 2 seconds, right? Do not live your life in accordance to what society tells you is good, true, and beautiful. And sometimes there is good, true, and beautiful. Like, we can find that everywhere. But look to what scripture has told us. Look at the gospels. Look at what Jesus has laid out for us. Look at the Beatitudes. My goodness. Like, that is where you will feel glimpses, and we cannot be truly happy on this earth, right? Like, it's not possible. It's an emotion like all other emotions, is fleeting, right? But that's what we are all desiring. It's like, look to what the truth that has been revealed to us and follow that. And that's where our like fulfillment and sense of, self in relation to God, which is huge. And I'm like, I promise you, you're not going to figure it out on your own. Like, you are a beautiful son or daughter of the Lord. And once you acknowledge that and start living your life in accordance to that, you will become who you are meant to be. On top of that, you will feel your most authentic self because you are living out the plan that God has intended for you with your skill sets, with where you live and what time period. Like, it's all unique to you. And that's the beauty of our faith. So I know I'm not answering the question, like what should have an adult done for me, but it's kind of what I want to do in the classroom for my kids, right? For my students, where it's like, I want to share my testimony to the point that I can with you, because I always said, like, it's not appropriate for high schooler. It's just not appropriate for me to, reveal all. But I'm like, I have been through things and seen things and experienced things that I wouldn't want any of you to experience. And it was when I said God isn't real. And it's when I said that my actions don't matter. There is no truth. There is no right and wrong. Reality is what I make of it. Truth is what I want it to be. Like, when everything became subjective, there's no direction in that. And ultimately, it leads you down a path that is the opposite of what God intends. So, yeah, I like to have it like be a adult role model to them. And sometimes I have kids that are like, no, I don't want a piece of the cake. Like, I don't want it, and that's fine. That's our human nature. That's our free will. And I think that's beautiful too. But for the most part, I have kids that come back years later and they're like, you're never going to guess. Junior year of college, I was in this situation. I remembered what you said and I got the heck out of there. And like, that happens all the time. And I'm just like, thank God. And if I wasn't, if you weren't on my roster, if I wasn't your teacher, you would have never heard that story. And that's God working, like God's providence. And I'm a walking example of God working through plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G until I chose him. Right. And so I want to be a voice to the kids that I'm like, you can choose them here and now at 16 years old and like not have to put yourself, your family, your friends, everyone through hell and back. Right. You can do that now. And I've had kids that are far beyond like where I am and was, and they choose God at 11, at 12. They choose them at 18. I just had 2 kids get baptized this year at 18 years old into the Catholic faith. Like, I see kids every day that use their free will to choose God and they don't look back. And how badly I wish that for myself when I was that age. And how I support and applaud and do whatever I can. I pray for them constantly for them to stay in it, right? Stay in it. Don't waver. You heard truth. You latched onto it. And I wish that for myself. So I hope that generally answers the question. But
I
yeah, I
think
wish I would have had an adult in my life that would have been like, it's real.
so. I think I that that's something I picked up on here is like because you went to all the classes, right? You had catechists, you had
Yeah.
Catholic teachers,
Yeah.
right? So
Yep.
so even though you may not remember them, they were there and they were probably sharing this truth
They
with
were
you.
there. Had to
But
be.
but maybe not
Hmm.
someone that was personally invested in you, I'm guessing, and someone that could grab you on the shoulders and say, Catherine, I want you to understand that, and someone that speaks deeply and personally into your life. Would you say like maybe that would have made a difference?
It would have. It would have. And I'm like racking my brain right now to try to think of someone. And I do remember a few youth ministers, but also there were 50 plus kids in youth ministry, right? It wasn't, and it was once a week, if that. Right. So it wasn't this like ongoing relationship. And even at church, there wasn't a lot of like young adults like kind of doing any type of ministry. And my parents, they wanted us Catholic, right? They wanted us to enter. I know they desired that for us, right? And again, it's not their fault that they weren't taught the proper tools. And like even now at church, our church has a whole family ministry where it's like we teach the parents how to teach the kids. And that is so important where it's like that it's not something for a lot of people that comes second nature, right? I'm a teacher, so it makes sense that I'm able to do these things with my kids because I have studied the psychology of children, from birth to adolescence, even adulthood. I know how and the way to word it and what resources to have. My parents didn't have the internet, right? They didn't have these resources that we have today, like, and that's not on them. They did the best they could. And parents today, I think sometimes it's they do the best they can, but sometimes they're just a little like checked out, and to each their own. But I do think an adult that has a relationship with the kid, right, and says like let's talk about it and listens, truly listens, and that's 100% of teaching is me just listening to these kids and their lives. And I speak when they ask for advice. I try my best not to say this is what I think you should do, because you have teenagers, like you know how that goes, where it's just like they don't want to be lectured.
Yeah,
So just
for
go
sure.
entering into dialogue with them and be like, why do you feel that way? Like, why do you think that? And so it's nice. I miss it so much, and I'm sure you can tell that I miss it so much. It's just it was not just a job. It is like a life's vocation. And a lot of my kids, when I tell them, I went to Notre Dame, I went to Harvard, they're like, why are you teaching us? And I'm always like, this is where I want to be. This is where I'm called to be. I don't want to be anywhere else. Right. I mean, yeah, it's cool. And you can say, your teacher went to Harvard. That's fun. It's fun for me to say that. Right. But at the end of the day, like, it's not about, right. I'm in like on the ground doing the work that a lot of people, the a lot of people, yeah. And guess what? They need it, and it's fun. So I enjoy it. But yeah, it's definitely an experience working with teens all the time.
So, Catherine, I think that a lot of people, I like to call this like everybody has to have a conversion moment, right? Like, it's one thing, like I see your passion for like, I wish the people I teach, I wish they'd get it, and I feel that way about my kids, especially like, oh man, I pray that they make good decisions, whatever. But I also recognize that everybody needs a conversion moment in their life.
Yeah.
And for some people it's pretty dramatic. And I think for you that was the case. So walk me
Yes.
through, you left high school, you had this Catholic upbringing, you had Catholic parents, you had this Catholic culture, the Catholic bubble, you lived in the Catholic heap, and then you
Yes.
went off to college. So walk me through that.
And it's funny because I went to Duquesne University for my undergrad, which is a Catholic school, right? And it's not why I chose it. But it's funny to look back and be like, there was an opportunity there for me to practice my faith. And college is really what you make of it. Any experience is what you put into it is what you're going to get out of it. So when I got there, I was 17, right? So I graduated fairly young. I did not turn 18 until 3 months into my freshman year. So I'm on the younger side. That has never been an issue before. I've always been fairly social, good at school, if you will. So it wasn't that it was challenging in an academic sense or a social sense. It was challenging because I have never been on my own or tasted freedom like that before. And I want to kind of focus on that word freedom, because a lot of people have different concepts of what freedom is. And I'd like to use JP2's kind of an analysis of it. So it's not an exact quote, but it's attributed to him, that freedom is not what we want to do, but what we ought to do. Right. And my concept of freedom when I was by myself, 4 hours away from home, where no one knew me, I could completely reinvent myself. That freedom was, I'm going to do what I want, right? Everything to this point, especially Catholicism, was something that someone made up for me not to have a good time, right? These morals, these teachings, the ethics, tenets of the faith. Like, you know what? I think that was all just baloney, right? I'm gonna call my parents' bluff. I'm gonna call the bluff of the church. It's not real. And at 17 years old, and you can meet any 17-year-old, they think they know everything, right? And I full blown was like, I have solved all of life's mysteries. This is all made up. And I'm going to, interact with this freedom in a way that I think is fit for me. Um, so there wasn't a moment where I was like, I'm now an atheist, because I don't think I cared enough, right? It wasn't something that I thought about a lot or contemplated what I believed. So I think it was a very easy, natural progression of that kind of Catholic heap that was never dissected and never internalized, for me to just say, okay, well, there's that. This is my new life, and God's not going to be a part of it. And it was easy because a new place, new person, right? New people, new experiences, and everything that happened 17 years up until this point. I don't want to say I'm going to forget about, but I'm going to do me, right? And I actively chose, and I want to be clear. I don't think I was evil, right? And none of the people I surrounded myself with in college were evil. A lot of them are still my friends, but I can very clearly say we were not searching for goodness, truth, and beauty, right? I can very clearly say that our actions, the impulsivity, what I prioritize, none of those things were in alignment with anything that God intended. Right. And so when I think about God's plan for my life, I do believe the whole time I was supposed to be a theology teacher. And, maybe he had a different kind of outcome if I would have followed the plan through 17 through 23, right? Like maybe it would have been a little bit different. But what I do know is that I had zero intention of doing anything in alignment with the church or anything in alignment with a faith or a set of standards. So basically what I said was, God's not real, therefore truth is not real, right? Everything became subjective. My actions, they did not matter, because there is no right and wrong when everything's subjective. And oftentimes it's always relative to what other people are doing. Well, I'm not a bad person, right? Because this person's actions are way worse, right? I'm still a good person because I'm not, actively doing X, Y, or Z, right? It becomes completely subjective. It becomes completely relational too, like where you are, what you're doing, who you're with. Like you can always say you're a better person, than the person next to you, but where's the standard, right? There is no standard. So it started off like small, I want to say, when we talk about, living a life of sin, and really like being shackled to that sin. And yeah, so like small things. So, I like to stay up late, and I still like to stay up late. But when you're in college, you're like, okay, I'm gonna, stay up all night and I'm gonna sleep all day. But there's a thing called classes, and they were inconvenient for me. And so I was just like, if I, keep these, right, I can casually, go to class when I want to. And there were some courses that it was mandatory attendance. But if they were large enough, I would just get my friend to sign me in, and I'm like, that's not lying because I'm still doing my work, right? I'm still doing my homework and I'm still taking the test and I'm not cheating. So therefore it's not bad. I'm just not going to the lecture because I already know all of this, right? I'm not going to the lecture because I'm still getting an A and I didn't even go to class, I can teach myself. And honestly, it puts a lot more pressure. It's bad, right? You get stressed out because you're like, am I going to fail because I'm not going to class? Did I miss something that was super important? You're anxious because you're like, does the professor recognize me? Does he know I'm not? Like, there's all these things that kind of come into play when you start doing start lying. Like, when lying is wrong and it's referenced in scripture so many times, so many. It's like, what does it say in scripture? It's like murdering your brother,
Hmm.
right? Isn't it like, yeah. And I'm just like, oh, but to me, there's no God, there's no scripture, there's no gospel. It's none of that, none of that. So lying didn't really matter, but that snowballs, right? Because when you lie, you have to remember your lies, right? If I told one professor, sorry, I can't make it, I would use every excuse in the book sometimes, to get extensions because I wasn't going to class. And it so then I'll see him like, oh, how, my dog died or something like that, like something crazy. And I'd be like, I'm going through some personal drama. And they'd be like, how are you? I'm like, I don't even remember what I told you. Right.
Hmm.
And so when we say like you become a slave to your sin, my example is lying because you have to remember those lies. And then it goes on a social side of things too. Say, I wanted to go out on a Friday night with some friends, but then I found a better party and I lied to those friends saying, I had to stay in and study because I have to, whatever. And so you have to remember the stories you tell. And those stories can get out of hand, right? Those lies you tell can get out of hand. So it starts off small, like I'm going to get my friend to sign me into class. You get away with that, no slap on the wrist. Like and then it gets bigger and bigger. You start missing entire semesters of class, right? In my case, school was not difficult. So I thought it was fine, right? But ultimately, I had to repeat 3 or 4 classes because of the attendance policy. You know how much money that is in college? Like, that's a whole semester right there. So the time, the money, like that impacted the consequences of my actions. Oh no, consequences of my own actions, right? But in my head, I'm like, I'm not still not doing anything wrong, right? And like my parents are probably going to listen to this and they kind of know like the gist that I had issues like going to class, but it was bad. And I ended up graduating, 3.4, 3.5 from undergrad. I have nightmares to this day about waking up and going to class and like being late or not going at all. And just the fact that I still have dreams about being on my undergrad's campus and like missing class, like it eats me alive to this day because I'm like, I love to learn. Goodness, I love to learn. I love school. I love being in school. Clearly, like I've been in school forever. Like I have all these degrees. And it's if 17-year-old me, 18-year-old me, 19, 20, whatever, could know me now, if I could just know them then and be like, I promise it's worth it. The relationships that I missed out with on peers, on professors, like some of my favorite moments in grad school were just one-on-ones with professors, right? Like that, I did not get that because I did not care. I did not prioritize anything that was good, right? And knowledge is always good, right? And so just doing the right thing by signing up for a class and attending, okay? So it just like that's one example of kind of a lifestyle choice that I was making that I would have never done in high school, that I would never do now, that I absolutely did not do when I was getting my master's in theology or master's in education. Like I went to every single class. I did every single assignment. I tried to do every single reading, but Lord knows that's impossible in grad school. And so it's sad. That was on an academic side of things where the implications of my actions affected not just me, even group work and stuff, but my parents, right? I mean, I love and adore my parents. They paid for my undergrad, and I am so blessed that they paid for my undergrad, but that's me being a selfish little brat, right? And so many parents, like, you're being a selfish, you're being a brat. Like, I truly was, but they couldn't tell me anything. right? They'd be calling me and they'd be like, so do you have your classes scheduled for next semester? I'd cry. I remember calling my mom crying, finals are so hard. Yeah, because I didn't go to class. And she would love me enough to make me feel better, but then she'd kick me right in the butt and be like, do you want to come home? Right? You don't have to go to college. And I'm like, no, I have to go to college because everyone else is going to college, right? I have to go to college because all my friends, it's going to be so embarrassing if I come home, right? I'm worried about the world. I'm not worried about me. Okay. I'm not worried about what my parents think and how much money they're spending on me. It was so self centered. And that's what happens when you become your own God, right? That's what happened. I became my own God. I became the legislator, the ultimate legislator. I made the laws. I was the judge, right? My action, I was the only one that was seeing my actions, and I was holding the moral code myself, and that code got lower and lower and lower and lower until I find myself in places that around people, I'm like, how the heck did that happen? And I'm like, oh, it's because I actively chose things that would hurt me, and I knew they were going to hurt me, right? But in the moment, I'm like, I'm invincible. Like I can do anything I want. And so I was young, I was dumb, and I mean, like ultimately, it got me in some pretty dicey and messed up situations. That I look back on, and I'm like, if I could save one kid from doing something dumb, like my story means something, right? And so it's hard though to wrap my mind around how obsessed with the world I was and obsessed with how others perceive me. I wanted to be the fun, like crazy, like go getter. And like that's how I was known for almost 5 years of my life. It's like, oh, Kat, she just showed up. Like things are about to get crazy. Like, and and now it's like there's a positive side now where and it's like, oh yay, like you're fun to be around. But I'm like, yeah, I'm also not blacked out. Like it's more fun when I can hold a real conversation with you and this is still enjoyable and I'm not dying, right? Like, and I'm not on the side of the road and I don't remember what's going on and I don't know what I've put into my body and I don't know the decisions I made or who I was with. And so it's um it's a cross definitely that I have to carry. And I always tell my kids, I'm like, your actions have consequences, and those consequences can turn into baggage, right? Those experiences you have, if you put yourself into traumatic situations or you find yourself in traumatic situations and you don't do anything about it, that turns into baggage. And that baggage goes into every relationship with you. It goes into every conversation you have, every lesson I teach, right? And they could like feel it, right? They're like, something's there. And I'm like, yeah. And it breaks relationships, right? It destroys any type of relation. And even like with my husband, like I have an angel of a husband. And we both have these stories of like going away from God and then ultimately coming back. But the baggage that both of us carry, like from that time period that seems so long ago at this point, right? My 20s seem like a different life, but I can still feel and like deal with the repercussions of my actions because it's like, oh, memories pop up, right? Memories are a crazy thing where I'm like, with my kids and like holding them and like just wow. And then all of a sudden I'll be taken back to 2 a.m. walking the streets by myself because I don't know where I am. And it's like, how did I get here? Where it's like the fact that I'm able to hold my beautiful children, the fact I'm alive to have children, right? And the fact I cared so little about myself and about my future and about my future husband, about my future job, future kids, that I would actively put myself in situations where I knew there was danger. I knew there were drugs. I knew there were people that had weapons on them while drinking. Like I actively put myself in those situations and I thought, nothing's going to happen to me. And I'm blessed that I made it out alive. And there were a lot of times we came close, right? Where it's like, damn, I probably shouldn't have done that. But the more times I put myself in those situations and the more times I came out of those situations, the more invincible I thought I was, right? So it's like this repetitive, like it's again, like a lifestyle, it snowballs and you get sucked into something, you lose your identity so much that you become a shell of a human. That shell of a human only puts in things that bring pleasure or some type of meaning, and it's all worldly, right? Like you have a shell of a person that's walking around aimlessly, filled with things that don't matter. And how are you going to treat yourself and others when you are that shell of a person? And not good. The answer is not good. The
No, I
answer is
think,
not.
I think something that's so interesting that you mentioned is that you love learning, right?
Yeah,
And you love to learn, you love school, and not everyone is in that same boat, but that is who you are at your core. And the things that you were doing and walking away from your faith was actually taking away from who you really were as a person. And so even though you kind of you talk about this freedom, like we think about this like, oh, I'm going to be free and I can reinvent myself. Doing those things actually took you away from that freedom, from finding out who you really were inside, huh?
I agree. And it's interesting because I always, when I recall college, one of the things is like my lack of focus on academics. And I've never really thought of that before, Justin. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, like it was pulling me away from not just God, but who I was and God's plan for my life. And so the devil works in crazy ways, and the spiritual warfare is so real. And I think all my insecurities were the one things driving me, right? And that's what temptation is. That's what the devil does. It's like, okay, where can I get this person? And mine was like, I wanted, to be popular, and I wanted attention, and I wanted, people to like me. And so I was sucked into a world where that was the focus, right? That and it's so sad because I just think of the other path, right? Where there's a chapel on campus, active campus ministry, and not even just my faith, like just goodness, right? Like I could have, still gone away from the faith and been good. So like when I say I went in the opposite direction, like I wasn't even trying to be a good person.
Hmm.
Like, so it's hard to reconcile my actions then with who I wish I would have been. So it's hard, like looking back sometimes. And like when you say that, it's like, yeah, taking you away from what you love. And that's ultimately what it was doing. Like all my actions were taking me away from love in all sources.
Hmm.
And even the relationship with my parents during that time was brutal. Relationship with my brother, I have a twin brother, like not great, right? I just think of the people like closest to me, and it's like that they those relationships didn't matter then. And I mentioned that there's a chapel on campus, and it's funny when I tell my students part of my story. I'm always like, I went to the chapel, or it's a church. It's a church. It's like the oldest church in Pittsburgh and has the latest mass. It's beautiful. I shouldn't say oldest, but it's 1878, so it's very old. And I went two times, and that's when there was the death of two students on campus.
Hmm.
And so to pay my respects, they had a service, and I went, right? So those were the two times. I don't tell them about the third time where, and I actually don't know if I've really shared this with many people, but there was a night that I was out, and I don't recall how or why or when, but I came to in the church on campus, and it wasn't like super, it was like 1 a.m. It's definitely locked. They locked that building. Don't know how I got in. The lights were off. I'm in the middle of like the sanctuary, but like so like at the kind of like before the altar, like at the foot of the cross, and I just kind of like come to, right? I'm not like on the ground. I'm not past that. Like it's not like I'm like walking, right? I'm like in a walk, and I'm like, whoa. And I'm like, how did I get here? Like, why am I here? Right. And at some, and I have, so like a memory like that where I'm like, damn, like he was calling the whole time. Of all places, after a night of drinking or at the bars, like what, like, I don't even know. I don't even know where I was that night. And I just remember coming to and being like, I'm in this, and I had been there two times previously. I'm just like, why am I here? Right. And we joked about it the next day. There she goes again, like, and that was it. That was it. That wasn't my conversion moment, right? Like, it wasn't like, oh, I need to change my ways. I need to, like, something's deeply wrong with me, right? That moment never happened. It was more like I got out of the building. I checked to see if the doors were locked, and they did behind me. So I'm like, how did I get into this building? Like, how did I get into this building? And yeah, I was known for scaling buildings and climbing through windows. So like I could have done that at the chapel, and that's terrifying to think about. But I again made it out alive. And I'm just like, how the next day we just laughed about it at brunch. Like it was just like, oh, you did what? Like you ended up in the chapel. Like, oh, that's great. And I'm just like, that's not, oh, poor Catherine. Like poor Cat. Like, just like I was searching and like desiring something that I knew was not the answer in what I was doing at the time. And like the fact that I couldn't realize that then, right? And so when we talk about that conversion moment, I went years of doing that type of stuff, like it just, there are a handful of moments like that stick out to me that should have been the moment, right? That should have been the moment. And it wasn't. And that's why I said, God worked in God's divine providence, like worked through when he couldn't get me, freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior year, like couldn't get me through this group of friends, that group of friends, like worked through all of the plans I had, right? Even in my sin, even in, my struggles and my rejection of him, he was still offering his grace, and he was still offering that gift, that relationship the whole time, right? And I look back, I'm like, yes, he was, and I kept rejecting it, right? And so he worked through all of my mistakes, and bringing about a greater good, like all of those sufferings. God works through to bring about a greater good. And you'd be like, oh, that's a bunch of BS. Like the cross, that is the ultimate sign of suffering. That in like Jesus Christ himself, if you think about his passion, even his life, but just his passion, like the immense amount of suffering that man, remember, man, human, fully God, fully man, but human went through, human suffering, physical, emotional, spiritual, right? Like to be mocked and belittled and stripped, like that emotional turmoil, but then have your skin ripped off your body and then nailed to a cross and bleed out and die of asphyxiation, like that is extreme pain, right? That is the ultimate sign of suffering. But the the empty tomb, right, that is the greatest good for mankind. So it's like, all right, Jesus, why does God let bad things happen to good people? Why is there suffering in the world? Why are there starving people in third world countries? And it's like, God knows, he knows that suffering. Okay. He knows that, we have our free will to do something about it. Right. And he's going to work through all of those things to bring about a greater good. And ultimately, we should be striving for heaven, which is the greatest good. So, like, our life can be full of suffering. I think C.S. Lewis has that quote: a life with God is not immunity to suffering, but it's hope in it.
Mm. Amen.
Right. Like,
Amen.
that's what we're here for. Like, so I'm glad, well, not glad I suffered. I wish I didn't suffer. Now I can use that, right? I can use my story and I can bring it to the classroom. I can bring it, to my friends, to my family. I've helped so many people through addiction, right? I wouldn't say like I was like addicted to anything, like per se, addicted to society. But I have friends that have dealt with really awful substance abuse, and I've been able to be present in a way that I would not have been present if I didn't go through my own struggles.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, there the moments of meeting God. Like I said no so many times, and I guess ultimately gets to the point where I said yes. But if you have any thoughts, so
Well, I did have just kind of one clarification. So I think that I kind of put it into three different groups. And I was thinking about this as you were talking, is that there are certain people that, they live a Christian life and they're like, I want to do everything to live this Christian life, right? And then there are some people that are like, I want nothing to do with this Christian life, and I'm going to do the complete opposite or whatever I feel is appropriate for this state of life. And I think both of those are looking for a unity of life, so to speak. We talk about unity of life, like my interior life, my exterior life, I want to match my interior life, right?
okay,
And so if you walk away from God and you're like, I'm just going to do whatever I want by whatever standards, like that is a unity of life, right? Where you have no You have no values, you have no morals, you have no standard, and so everything in the external is going to match the interior, right?
Mhm.
But then there's this middle group, and I would say
Mhm.
I have found myself at times in this middle group where I can convince myself, and this was me at certain times in my life where I can convince myself, oh, I'm still a good person, I'm still a Christian, I'm still a part of this.
Mhm.
And so I do things on the outside, but in the inside I'm like, ah, it's okay. Like I have this like disunity of life, right?
Mhm.
But in your case, you're like, I don't want anything to do with this, right?
Right. And so that middle ground is really interesting. And you meet a lot of people there, right? Like I would say a majority of people probably fall in that category. And part of me wishes, like, and I would say everyone around me would have probably lumped me in that category, right? Like, so it's like I know where I was on that inner self, right? And it was much darker than maybe some of the action. I mean, the actions were speak for themselves, right? But it was much darker, like that the darkness, the hopelessness, the despair, the depression, the anxiety that comes with just doing whatever you want whenever you want, right? So yeah, I would have been that category. I would have kind of wished, like, I don't really believe in this, but I'm still gonna try to carry out, what I know is to be true or what I've learned, growing up. And I would still, I'm sure people would have said, you were still nice, like you were a nice person. And I'm like, I think that's just part of my personality. I don't think I could turn that off, right? But I don't think some of my actions would be if people truly knew. Again, I don't want to share everything, but like I did some things that I'm like, oh my gosh, like that is a horrible thing for someone to do. And like I would have told myself back then, I'm still a good person. I'm still a good person. So it's interesting because I also know a lot of people that would fall into the middle category, but also like atheists, right? Very moral, ethical atheists who have a standard for life that's kind of like influenced by the Western world and influenced by Christianity, but they don't believe in God, right? And so it's interesting to really think about. And it's like, what do you say? What do you do? Right. Like, so I don't know. I think you need to take a like long, hard look in the mirror and be like, do you believe in the afterlife? Right. Like, so like at the end of the day, we're all living to go to heaven. Right. And, if someone doesn't believe in heaven, okay, then why are you even living a ethical and moral life? Like, what's the point of that? But there, I would say they would argue because I'm like thinking of my best friend here, as like it's important to be contributing members of society, right? To work towards a just like society. And some of the best people I know are atheists. But they have like an end goal, right? Like we're all on this destination. Like there has to be a destination. Like when I was in my, kind of that category where we're talking about like the inner life looks like the outer life, there was no destination, there was no goal, right? And I always, tell my kids that the concept of grace can be really hard to understand. And I'm like, it's a GPS, right? Like there's a destination, it is heaven. And when you plug in a destination on your GPS, like it gives you the fastest route, but obviously there's all these alternative routes. So there's a road closure toll, all that stuff. And it's this like destination that you want to get to in the like hopefully the most accurate and efficient way would be allowing God's grace to work through you and following that and carrying out the plan. But there again, he's going to work through everything. I was going somewhere with this. Oh, but for as like Catholics and Christians, like we have that destination of heaven, and that's what our actions are oriented to, right? So when you're in that middle category, I just wonder like what are you oriented to? Like what is the destination? What is the goal? Why do you even do the things that you do if you don't necessarily believe in that? Like it's always hard. And that's just a lot of self-work right there. Like a lot of reflection, a lot of learning too. Like there's an emotional side to our faith, which I kind of lean towards too, but the intellectual side is very important. So you have to understand the dogmas, like you have to understand what the church lays out for us, and we have to accept that, right, as truth, and it should change you. And if it doesn't, then you're probably not understanding something correctly. So go back and learn more. Like that's kind of like my argument there. So yeah, you gotta look in the mirror, do the self work, and learn, because ultimately, like, you need a destination, and it might be just the end of this earthly life. Like, that's probably a lot of people's destinations, where I'm like, okay, that's fine, that's fine.
Yeah, and you're making me think of something, and I'd love to just keep this conversation going for hours and hours and hours because, like, I'm
Sorry, I
thinking to
could talk to
myself,
you forever.
no, no, it's okay. Like, I appreciate this so much because I think that, um, I I think maybe one of the things, like, one of the things that I've seen is that people who grow up in a Christian home and have that background or surrounded in that bubble or whatever, and they get into college and they're like, oh, I've got this freedom all of a sudden, and they just totally lose their minds. Like they just go
I
crazy. Yeah, and it's a form of deconstruction that
Mhm.
is ultimately destructive. And I
Mhm.
think maybe because I've seen some very moral atheists. And I would say, wow, they are way more moral than this person
Mhm.
who grew up in a Christian home and just went off the
Agreed.
deep end.
Agreed.
And I think it's because the person that deconstructs like that has not has they're they haven't thought through it. They're rebelling against everything
Mhm.
that they grew up with and all of these constraint, or they see everything as a constraint,
See
and now
everything.
the
Yes.
whole world is open to them. We see this all the time. I live in Utah, and so I mean, these are there's tons of Mormons that
Yeah.
I always say like Utah has two cultures to it. Has a very straight edged Christian culture, like Mormon Christian culture kind of thing. And then it has like people who are like, I want nothing to do with religion. Like they are
Mhm.
deconstructing everything. And there's
Mhm.
not a whole lot of in between sometimes, you know.
You.
So what would you, I mean, does that
It was
resonate with you?
interesting. Yeah, I do have a few thoughts because I think I said some of my favorite students are, and to this day, like my atheist students, and some now, like the one person I'm thinking of is now, agnostic, leaning towards Christianity, right? Like he's come to terms with there. You know what? I think there is a God. And this is one of the most brilliant humans I've ever taught. Went to Oxford, is getting his PhD, like just absolutely brilliant. And I met him in 2016. Yeah, 2016 when he was a sophomore. So like now I think he's like 24 or 25. And we've kept in touch over all these years. And we laugh because his girlfriend is German. And that's a very like absolutely no faith background there at all. And he'll talk about his Catholic high school. And he had a great experience, right? And she's like, that's so weird that you keep in touch with your theology teacher of all teachers. Like, he's like, no, like those were my people. And it's like I was atheist, but they were amazing human beings, right? Like he would be popping in after school, just chit chat, let's talk. But he did the work though. Like I appreciated him in his atheism because he thought about it. He came with arguments. The deconstruction there, and he was raised in a fairly religious like household, and so it just I appreciated the effort he put in and the continued learning he did. Right. So even I'm thinking of like my atheist friends now as adults, and some are atheists but like I just don't want to think about it, and those aren't great conversationalists, right? And that I'm just like I'm not even going to entertain a conversation because you don't think about it. It's God isn't real because I don't want to think about it, right? But some of my friends are like, no, this is from my own life experiences, like X, Y, and Z. Here are some reasons why I am who I am, and I just always appreciate that, right? And we can talk about morals, we can talk about politics, which is also it's very hard to discuss, but when you have a true relationship with someone, it really, at the end of the day, like me being Catholic and them being atheist doesn't mean we can't be friends.
Right.
Like me being one side of the party, them being the other, it doesn't mean we can't be friends. And as long as there's like mutual love and understanding, like you can have any type of conversation. So it's just fun. Like, yeah, I think that if you're doing the work and you come to your own conclusions, whether it be Catholic, other Christian denominations, what have you, atheist, agnostic, whatever, as long as you're putting the work in, like I don't have a problem with it. And I think you're searching, like actively searching. God's going to get you one day.
Well, Catherine, I think one of the things that we hear often about, especially today, is trauma, about self-care, those types of things. I think people are becoming more aware of this. And I think that's a point that I don't remember hearing about in college. Like the things you do now can cause real trauma later on in life.
Mhm.
So talk a little bit about that, and maybe some things that you feel comfortable sharing in your experience, and maybe what you advise to other teens.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, that's a big one. Um, so it's important to kind of think about the adolescent brain and like development. And I know it might just be like my education psychology like coming in, but adolescence, your impulsivity is up, your decision making is down. So I think it's the limbic system, which is your emotions, that's being rapidly developing in that time period. So you really care about what others think about you. You really want to be in social situations. You have heightened emotions and you like heightened emotions. Like that's the key there. Adolescents enjoy when they have, kind of that thrill. Um, they tend to seek that thrill because of the way that it feels, more so than we do after our brain is done developing, which is like 25. And then the decision making is down. I don't want to say like logic, but your prefrontal cortex is the last thing. And so, like, weighing your options, being cautious, thinking through things and consequences, like that's not all happening, right? When you're in your late teens and early 20s. So when we hear about, tragedies that occur with young people, oftentimes you'll hear, like drunk driving accidents, something absolutely terrible, and like you can prevent it, but I don't want to say it's not necessarily their fault because they're not all there, right? And I was teaching them like I respect that you are going through a developmental period that we should be working with, not against. So the more education, the better. When you have those as a parent, having those sit down conversations about, never get into a car when someone's drinking, don't do drugs. You hear that all the time, right? Don't do drugs. Make sure you have the conversation of the this is what could happen, right? And you know what overdose is, right? But there's also things like the synthetic marijuana where like it's not real or something. Like I'm not quite caught up to date on that one, but it's basically like if you smoke it you die instantly, right? And it's like on the streets. And then obviously there's a huge drug problem with like prescription painkillers, and that turns into heroin. And I know that sounds crazy to talk to a 16, 17-year old, but dang, you don't know what they're going to be coming in contact with when they're outside your home. So I remember my freshman year, I was at a party and it was the first time I saw cocaine. Right. And I walked in to just get my jacket, and this guy's like has a line like on his desk in his room, and I was like, is that cocaine? And he was like, yeah, you want some? I was like, no thanks. Like, just kind of like, what? Like, I've never even, that's real. Like, it was this kind of like boogeyman thing. Oh, people actually like do that. And I just remember my little bubble, it was popped then, and I was like, no, like, what do you mean? So and the thing is I'm curious, right? I had never seen it, I had never like been around it, so I'm like, can I watch you do it? Like that was my reaction, but at least it was smart enough to be like, no, I'm good, but I'm just a little curious, right? And so like my friends ultimately come up and they're like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm watching this guy do cocaine. Like that happened. Addie, I was at a Catholic university. I mean, I'm 17 years old. First, yeah, taste of freedom, if you will. And I'm just like, no way. Like, and I do tell that story to my students because I'm like, you never know. Like, I went to this high school. I went to the same middle school that a lot of you guys went to. I had the same upbringing, sat in the same seats, right? And then that happens, right? And so it's like things you don't necessarily think about, like, what are you gonna do? And for me, it was always, nah, I don't do drugs. And I was an athlete my entire life, right? And I loved sports, and I ended up not pursuing it in college. That was a huge piece of my identity that was taken away along the same time that I'm in a new place. So not only am I we're talking about that freedom, but I also have a thing that took a majority of my time, most of my life, and it is no longer part of my identity. And that's a huge identity crisis in and of itself when you're an athlete and you stop playing sports. So knowing yourself is such a huge part of making any decisions. But at that point in time, 17, turning 18 years old, I did not know who I was. So when I was presented with things for the first time, I'm like, you know what? I might be this person. Let me just, give it a little try. I might be this person. Let me put myself in this situation. Oh, that didn't work. Okay. Oh, I like this. Okay, I'll do this more. I was figuring it out. And one evening, with my friends, and there's a group of people I don't necessarily know, but I know of, and I'm like, oh, I want to be their friend, right? They're like the people I like want to be seen with. Okay. And so I kind of venture off in a group of people that I don't really know that well. And they're partaking in some activities that I don't do, right? And I've already made it very clear, like, oh, like drugs were always like a no-no, right? And this guy, the classic teenage, like that I thought was cute, was like, oh, like you should take some of this. And I was like, oh no, it's not really for me. Doing like the what I've been taught. I was like, you know what? No, like I know a ton of people that do drugs, and like nothing happens to them, and like everything would be fine. Like it's just a little bit. And so ultimately I made the decision, and that's why it's very hard to talk about. And when we talk about trauma, a lot of people, there's external factors, like you get a medical diagnosis, or lose a loved one. It's these external things, and it's hard for me to share my story because it's all self-driven, right? I did all these things. I made the decision. I said these things and did these, and that's why like it breaks my heart, because I didn't have these all these traumatic events. I had a perfect childhood. Gosh, I had a perfect parents, and like it's just I made the decision to do things I shouldn't have done, and I knew were wrong, but I did them anyway. Yes, my adolescent brain was still developing, and I was desiring to fit in and be cool and all of those things. But at the end of the day, I knew what was right and wrong in my core, and I chose wrong. So unfortunately, in this circumstance, everything was not okay, right? I get back to my friends, and they could tell something was very wrong with me. And I'm lucky because I made some very good friends freshman year, and immediately they knew something was off. And they got the RAs, RDs involved, and they're like, look, she's not right. Something's wrong. And I do remember all of it now. And it took a long time to like recall things because of, what happened. But I thought I was talking the whole time, right? I thought I was like, help, like, like something's wrong. Like my body doesn't feel right. I can't really breathe that well. And this was right after I was with people doing illegal activities, right? So like you can kind of put two and two together. And all of a sudden I collapsed. And luckily I was at the dorm when this happened. So like on the first floor, like right outside of the elevators. And my friends went crazy. They're like, who was she with? Like, where did you go? Like they knew something was very wrong, because I am not that type of person, right? Or wasn't then, still not now. But they got me to the hospital. Luckily, Duquesne is in the heart of Pittsburgh. You could throw a rock and hit a hospital. And so the campus police like came and picked me up and took me to the hospital, but no one knew what happened. Great. So I like ventured off by myself, and then I come back and I'm like incapacitated, right? Like they did not know what was happening. And that is a terrifying thing for a friend, right? And I'm thinking about trauma, like they had to live through this too. So I get there, and the doctors don't know. No one can say what happened, right? No one knows. And I'm not able to talk, and my body just shuts down, and I feel myself dying, right? That's the only way to say it. And it's really sad, and it's really scary. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone. I wouldn't wish that on it just, in the fact this happens all the time is what's really scary. So my body shuts down. What ended up happening was it was a mixture of like the Rufalin drug, when they're like roofies and that type of stuff, plus a bunch of other random stuff. Like at the end of the day, my tox screen was, there was over 15 drugs in my system, in the tox screen. And I don't know, I don't know how exactly, like if they switched it out, like, oh, look, this girl's coming, like, let's switch it out. Or like what, like, I'm not quite sure how, obviously. But when I got there, they did not know what was happening. So they had to, check all their bases, which that comes with a lot of trauma too, because, I was let me hold on for a second. Okay. When I got there, I was the third freshman from Duquesne that either, I want to say it was that month, like something in a very small amount of time that came in with the same symptoms. Um, by the absolute grace of God, I was not assaulted. But that was the MO of this person, and it happened to two girls prior to me. So when they did the blood work, they kind of were expecting, they knew it was going to come back. But in that moment, I don't know what's happening, right? So I don't know what's happening. My friends don't know what's happening. I can feel my body shutting down. And you go on, like when these types of drugs are in your system, it's like respiratory failure and then heart failure. Like that's kind of like what the progression of it. And to tell you the truth, like I seized at one point. I do remember having a seizure because like it just crazy. And then like it just was a mess. Anyway, they brought me back. Like ultimately, like I died, right? Like I had a very, yes, like I died, right? And that's a near death experience, but to the point where it's like, okay, medically, like I was gone for, it could have been a couple seconds, minutes, maybe. I don't remember because there's no memory of that point in time, but I do like remember the moments of like, this is it, right? This is it. This is how I die. And it's hard to describe because you hear all these beautiful, I saw light, right? And these near death experiences that are shared often are I saw a loved one, or I heard a voice, or yeah, there was a tunnel and a white light, or I saw heaven, I saw Jesus, something along those lines. Mine was the complete opposite, right? And that's what's terrifying to me. Where everything was getting distorted, the faces of the people around me, like the doctors, the staff, the nurses, people just walking by, like there was distortion in all their figures. There was a clock on the wall that I will never forget, and it was just stuck at the time that it was at that point in time, and it didn't move. And I was like, this is it. Hell is, I was like, I'm going to hell. And it's living the moments of my death for the rest of eternity, knowing that I'm dying and knowing I can't do anything about it, and knowing that how I'm living has been complete BS for the last, and at that point it was only a few months. This was December of 2008. So I had been in college I had a month after I turned 18 years old. So yeah, it's hard. And even like, this is the first time really talking about it. The people, all my friends that were there, like, they remember this, like it was yesterday. And we still, I know, so like we joked about the chat, like we still, like they joke about the next day. It's like, oh, remember when you died? Like it's great. It's funny, but also like not funny at the same time. Cause it's like, I obviously was not okay. And they did help. Anyway, it's hard to reconcile all of these things together, even in my memory. But when I got there, since I was 18 years old, legally an adult, they're like, do you want us to notify your parents? Right. That was the first question. I mean, I guess I nodded yes, said yeah. I was like, yeah, of course, I'm dying. Yes, you have to call my parents. Right. So I had the wherewithal to be like, please call my parents. Right. And after this whole experience, I was also on a bunch of drugs. So on top of that, not ever doing drugs and being roofied, I'm also high, right? Like, so I'm like, what is real? What is not? So I'm going through all of these things, and I'm seeing hell. Like, this is horrible. There was like flames, but they weren't burning, and they were like gray. It was awful. And mind you, I had not read St. Faustina's diary. I had not dug into what hell is at this point in time, right? And I did years later. I'm like, no freaking way. Like, I really think that I had a vision of purgatory or hell or something. And when I came to, I didn't remember anything off the bat, right? So I had no concept of why I was in the hospital. My grandfather, God rest his soul, my favorite human on the face of the earth, is next to my bedside crying. And I just was like, why am I here? Did I fall? And he's like, you don't remember. And still at that point, no one knew what happened. So he's in the dark. I don't know what happened. I wake up. I think I fell. I hear my friends in the waiting room, and they're like losing their minds, like, because they're angry, right? They're like, someone tried to hurt you, or something happened that we don't know about, and they're trying to figure it out. And so ultimately, I got back. I had to go to like Duquesne, that type of, there's like a DU cares thing. I don't know how to describe it. It's just like helps you through like when you get caught drinking or out. But I'm like, I'm trying to explain to them, like, this is very out of care. Like, I don't know what happened. Like, this is not me. Right. And I laugh because I'm like, that should have been my wake up call. That was 3 months into college. Like, and I end up in a hospital dying. Like, hello, hello. Like, at but the next day, I just remember walking back from, the dining hall with my friends, and we're just laughing about it, right? Like, we're like, oh man, that was pretty crazy, huh? Like, yeah, that was pretty crazy. And I laughed too. Like, and I don't know. It's sad. It's really sad. And my parents came up, obviously, and they're like, what the heck? And I was like, I can't even explain myself, right? And of course, they wanted to take their baby home. Like, they're like, what? No. And I was like, no, I'm fine. It was like a fluke. And at that point, I still didn't remember really until like months later. I like was able to piece together like the events, and I talked to people, and ultimately there was this guy got caught, and there was a case, and they asked if I wanted to be part of it, and I wanted nothing to do. I was like, no, like I the other girls were pursuing like legal action, and I was like, no, like I'm good. I wanted nothing to do with it, right? And they called me in, and they're like, look, like, do you want to be a part of this? And I was like, no, no, not one. And I didn't even tell anyone that they called me back in to be like, this is someone, a repeat offender, basically, like someone that was using a position to get close to vulnerable girls and would drug them and all that stuff. So I'm like, nah, I'm good. Like, I'm glad you got him. Like, and that was it. Like, part of it's like, why? Like, fight him. Like, fight. And I was like, no, I want to know part. And I was invincible. Like, oh, I survived it. And so it's interesting now on the other side of things where I'm like, I've had some really cool spiritual experiences, and we don't have to really get into them. That's a conversation for another time. But I think a lot of it has to do, like, it's all kind of related. Like, it's like I had a pretty devastating spiritual experience, and I did not come to Jesus in any way, shape, or form after that. But when I did and had all these experiences, they were very powerful and very, like, the veil is thin, if you will. Like, I've had this near death experience, and now I'm able to like feel and just things that I'm like, oh, that's not really normal for someone to be able to do or feel, right? And so it's come in handy though. It's coming. My parish priest and I are boys, and done a few exorcisms with them, which has been cool. So, but I have not been exercised, not on me. I on other people. They bring me along sometimes, which is fun.
Oh, that's interesting. That
Yeah,
would
it
be a
is.
good conversation for another day.
Yeah, it is definitely, definitely.
Yeah. So okay, so you die on the hospital bed,
Yeah,
and you're brought back to life. You have these horrific visions of what the afterlife in your case looks
in
like,
my case, yeah,
and and it still didn't bring you closer to the Lord.
no.
So at what point did Catherine wake up and say, enough is enough?
Goodness gracious. 5 years later, maybe six. I don't even 2008. Yeah, like 5.5 years later, which is wild. So that went on, like, decision making like that and putting myself in situations like that continued on for a long time. And I won't say like every day of my life back then was like that. Of course, like, it's the mundane of just surviving college. Like, I obviously graduated, I had to be doing something, and I had a job at one point, and I mean, I traveled and all that stuff. So it's not like every day I woke up and was like, how can I destroy my life today? But that's what, honestly, looking back, that's what it feels like. But I know that there were months of just kind of like going with the flow, right? Nothing drastic happened. But I also wasn't drastically trying to, find truth at the same time. So after I graduate, I rewind. I always knew I wanted to be a teacher, like from a very young age. Probably when I was like in middle school, I had like oh, I want to be a teacher. But then in high school, it became like, oh, I could actually do this. Right. And so I knew very young, I wanted to be a teacher. I always loved my social studies teachers because they were the quirkiest. So it's like, I want to be a social studies teacher. So I went to school for that. I went to Duquesne it was a dual major in history and education. So when I graduated, I moved home just to, find a job. And while I was like applying, I guess, because it was I graduated because I had to take an extra semester. I graduated in December of 2012. So yes, December of 2012. So when I got home, the job postings for the next year hadn't been posted yet. So I'm like, how do I make a little bit of money in between, now and then? And I started subbing at Spalding. So I was just day-to-day sub. If they needed me, they called me. It was like $80 a day back then. I hope it's more now. But I was just in the halls of Spalding. And so one day the principal calls me in his office, and I love this man, still love this man to this day. And he was like, "Hey, Catherine, like, I know you're an alumni. You went to a Catholic college. You were so active in your faith when you were in high school. We have a job opening, and we'd love for you to be a teacher here." And I'm like, "Oh, sweet. Like, who's leaving in the social studies department?" And he was like, "Oh, it's for theology." And I was like, "You've got to be kidding me." But like I said in the beginning of our conversation, it made sense if you knew me growing up and you met me, later in life, that gap there that no one was present for from back, like you would have never known, right? Like, so he knew teenage me well, right? And he knew I was a certified teacher, which was huge, right? So, in his head, since I went to a Catholic university, of course she's practicing Catholic. I had not been to mass since high school graduation. And so I'm like, "Oh no." And I'm like, "Let me think about it." And I go home, I talk to my parents, and ultimately I was like, "I'm going to do a great job. And then I'm going to switch over to the social studies department the next year." I knew internal movement was much easier than getting a job at a place. And the fact I didn't have to interview and I didn't have to apply was huge. And it was a school I loved. I thought it would be, I was thrilled to work there. Um, so I go in the next day and I was like, "I am going to be the best theology teacher the school's ever seen." Mind you, I didn't even believe in God. Like, it's crazy to look back, but the two things that we've discussed, the one thing I knew I wanted to be was a teacher, and I love learning. And those things are becoming apparent even in this conversation. I'm just like, wow, God reached into my life, and the only thing that I loved, the only thing I desired was to be a teacher. And in order to do that, you really have to know your content in and out. And I knew that, right? I was prepared to be a social studies teacher, but I'm like, you know what? I can learn this in order to teach it. Like, I can do this. I had a lot of time because I was hired in the spring. So I'm like, I can just prep all spring and summer. And by the time the school year starts, I'll be able to teach these lessons, right? Not teach the faith, like teach these lessons. Um, and in order to do that, I had to do a very intense Bible study. I had to actually open the catechism. Wow. Open the Bible. Incredible. I started going to mass and I was like, I should probably get well versed in this. And through that process of just learning to teach someone else, I internalized it in a way that I never internalized as a kid. I studied in a way that I'd never studied as a kid. Right? I took my time. I prayed for the first time in a very long time, and I just asked for patience because I was getting frustrated in the beginning there. And I asked for, clarity and wisdom when reading scripture because it's dense. And so ultimately, I was brought to God through teaching. And at some point in that summer, I'm in the book of Psalms, sitting in, I was living at home at the time. So I'm sitting in my childhood bedroom with my Bible that my godparents gave me at my confirmation, with my back against my bed. And I'm in the book of Psalms and I'm just sobbing. I'm crying and I'm like, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever read. Why have I never read this before? Why wasn't I taught this? And it was this, like, a moment that I really can't describe, this epiphany moment. Like, time stood still and it was like, this is your vocation, right? This is what I'm calling you to do. I want you to convey this to young people in a way that it was never conveyed to you. I want you to bring me to them, right? And I want that for the rest of your life. And that was kind of hard because I was like, wait a minute, like I have some other dreams and other goals. And I just remember I was so broken still, right? So I get this job, I put on a good face, I get this job. I'm still the same person, right? I'm still the shell of a human. I'm trying to learn, but I'm still that's a lot. That's years and years. And some people go their entire lives in that state, right? The years and years of damage and decision making and trauma and suffering and like never turning. I'm lucky. I consider myself lucky that I only have that for a short period of my life, where I can now like turn to God and be like, this is okay. Who am I now? Who am I in relation to you? Because that's who I need to be. And I was able to kind of like break that shell open and be filled with the things that I'm called to be. Anyway, so I was going to say something. Oh, I now I that summer I'm still the shell of a person, but I felt called to learn and study more and more and more and more. And my immediate boss at the time was our department chair, and he didn't want to hire me because he could see right through me. Right? He did not. He made it very clear he did not want me to be a teacher in his department. He went to the principal behind my well, not really behind my back. I wasn't an employee yet. He was like, I do not want her to be a teacher in my department. And they're like, it's already done. And that's another grace of God because he was not in charge of hiring at that point in time because he was like on personal leave for something. And we laugh about it to this day. This man was at my wedding. This man is one of my mentors. We text all the time still. He's retired, long retired. But to this day, we laugh about it. He's like, I'm so glad that I had my own stuff going on because I would have never hired you. And look how much good it has brought both of us. And I'm like, I agree. And even in my I do confirmation talks, and sometimes he's there and he's like, I told him not to hire her, but I was wrong. And he said at the end of that summer, like we had a meeting, and he's like, you were a completely different person. The wisdom, he's like, it was crazy to talk to you because you were saying things that someone that has been on a journey their entire life would be saying, right? The wisdom, it didn't, he's like, it didn't make sense, right? And that's God. Like that's God saying, this is who you are meant to be. I'm going to give you the clarity of I'm going to give you, the things you're asking for, honestly, like understanding of this faith in a way that doesn't make sense. I would teach, and sometimes I would like black out when I was teaching on the Trinity. It's so hard to teach the Trinity. I would black out and I would like come to you, and the kids would be like, that was the best lesson I've ever had. Like, that was the Holy Spirit. Like, that was not me because I wanted my kids to understand it so badly. And I prayed for that. I'm like, please just let them hear this and let them receive it. And all of a sudden, I'm like dreaming lessons, right? I'm like dreaming in lessons. And I was like, it was God the whole time. And so I'm like, when people are like, oh, how do you know it's real? One, everything I've been through, but also the wisdom that I've been able to have that I know was not my own. Like, oh, it's not. And so it was cool. That summer was a lot of studying, kind of like the beginning of the healing process. And like I said, I was like, okay, like if this is what you want, and I heard like the rest of your life. I was like, if this is what you want, help me be okay. And that was my prayer. Just help me be okay because I was still just a struggling mess of a human. And I will give the rest of my life to you. I'll do it. I'll do it. And here we are, I guess. Yeah, I don't know, 15 years later. Is it 15? No, 12. 12 years later. And I have not looked back for a second. It's brought about, friends and my husband. Like, whoa, that one's a whole, again, another story, another day. But like, we would have never met. We would have never met if it wasn't for me coming back into the faith. And now we get to raise our kids in an environment that both of us desire, that neither one of us really kind of had, but like we're doing it now together and learning as we're going. And so it's just been, God is good. And so it's fun. And people that know me in real life, like, know I'm a teacher and know I care and know, and like they can come and talk to me, but it's not in your face. Like, even if some of my friends listening, they're like, wow, I didn't know a lot of that, because it's just parts that I don't really share a lot.
I want to pause because you have said things that I don't think you realize you've said. And it's completely poetic because you've used this term time stood still now twice.
Oh,
Once when
wow.
you were in the hospital dying, you're like, I looked at the clock and time stood still. And the other time when you were um, teaching theology. I think you just said it. Yeah, you're teaching theology. You're like,
Yeah.
and
The
then you
Psalms,
talked
when I was
about
in the book
like
of Psalms. Yeah.
blacked out. Like one time
Yeah.
I blacked
Oh, yeah.
out.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
the deathbed, right? And the other time
Yeah.
I blacked out while I was teaching on the Trinity.
Yeah.
One time
Yeah.
where you you had Yeah, everything was distorted, right? Like all the faces were distorted. And the other time when your mind was being opened up to the Psalms. And I just think that's so beautiful. It's just it's this parallel that it just blows my mind. I don't know. I just thought that was
Because
so
I
beautiful.
am not doing that on purpose. I
I know you're
promise
not.
you.
I
And
know.
I'm not a poet. But this, I prayed over even talking to you about this because I really I'm afraid at times, like where it's like, dang, like my story isn't that like different than someone else's. And also I get nervous talking to people about it. And I'm just like, it is who I am, and who I am now. Like the people that know me now, like they're like, you love everyone. You get there's so much love. And I'm like, yes, and I want to see that, but I also want them to know that if you're not in that state, you can get there, right? Like I love my faith, and it is everything, right? It's everything to me. Um, but I also know that there are people that don't believe they'll get there one day,
Mm.
that don't think it's worth it for them, that think they're a lost cause. They are in that pit of despair and hopelessness. There's no direction. And to be on the other side of it, I never thought I would have a family, right? I never thought I would be teaching thousands of teenagers like about Jesus. Like if you would have found me then when I was in that pit, it would have been so far-fetched that it's like that can't be me. But that's the beauty of conversion and reversion, and that's the beauty of like transforming your life in Christ. And there are some people that are like, you were more fun in college. Like there's some people like, oh, I liked you better then. And I'm like, well, I was killing myself then. So
Yeah.
that's not a real
Did
friend.
they really like you? You know, like
Exactly. And that's exactly. So
yeah.
yeah. Thank you though for pointing that out. I look forward to listening back because you're right. It is a lot of Holy Spirit.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, I want to ask you a couple more questions.
Okay.
And
I can be quick. I can be
no,
quick.
it's all good. It's all good. We take as much time as you want. This is great. I I think it's such an important story, and I think one of the things that for the parent out there that has their kids going off to college, mine, my kids,
Yeah.
right? And 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 the kid seems to be walking away from the faith. Like, what do you say to that parent?
It's hard. Um, I think first and foremost, I'd be like, where are you in your faith journey as the
Mm,
parent? Because kids can see through any inauthenticity like that, right? So it's like for me, like the part I didn't really talk about was my parents left the church right at my high school graduation.
mm,
So I think not that that had everything to do with it. Of course, it was my own being, but I knew they weren't going to call on Sunday to ask if I went to mass. Like I knew I had no one to answer to with if I was going to church or not. So I would ask like, how are they living out their faith? Is it visible to their kids? And they would probably argue yes, but really think about from their kids' perspective. How do they include them? How does the parent include them in the parent's expression of their faith? Um, what is offered to them? Is it just you need to go to church on Sunday, or are there other opportunities there? Like also meeting them where they're at is huge. Like they know, if you're like, I want you to do this, I want you to, it's hard for a kid to receive that, right? But I don't know, throwing the chosen I'm a huge fan of, by the way. Throwing the chosen on when on like a school night, right? And you're like, hey, why don't you come sit and watch some TV with me? Like meet them a little bit halfway, like where they probably don't want to talk about why they're leaving the faith, right? And if they do, good, then have those conversations. Uh, so yeah, I think just thinking about what they would be interested in. And there's a ton of stuff out there. And again, like I said, my parents didn't have resources. There's a ton of resources out there now. I would see who they're hanging out with. That's always like you can kind of tell what direction they're going in by their friends and what the extracurriculars are in that friend group. Mine was always athletics and sports and like sure, but sometimes that meant on Sundays, right? And were we prioritizing sports over, church and all that stuff. So I don't know. I would try to find what they're interested in and figure out how to match that to the faith. And there's obviously like museums and art and Habitat for Humanity or things you do with your hands, like Catholic Art Work Camp, where there's the Catholic Church has an answer for it. Like that's always my thing. Where I'm like, it's big enough and broad enough. Like there's some thing for everyone. So yeah, I would think about their, what their likes are and try to cater to that. Also just understanding the psychology or the neuroscience, like their brain is doing things, right? And respecting that, where it's like, I want to be impulsive, like I want to, but like you can work with it, right? You want to be impulsive, let's go on a hike, and it just happen to be at, a holy site or a pilgrimage, or like you want to plan a trip, let's go somewhere, and like just being able to tie it in where you can use these kind of what we could perceive as downfalls as strengths. Like, all right, you're impulsive, or the social aspect, they're desiring social interaction, finding a youth group, finding something where there are other kids their age, doing fun things. So yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think too, like, I think what you said, like, how are they living out their faith? I think is so important because I always say, like, kids are not stupid. Like, they see right through
Yeah.
facades. And so for these parents who are like, I love this verse that I'd never really understood until I became Catholic, and that is like childbirth may save you, or something like that. It comes, I
Mhm.
can forget what
Yeah.
letter it comes from, but you may be saved through childbirth. And it's like I've seen a lot of people in my life who walked away from Christianity, and when they had kids, they were like, it's a huge wake up call. Like now I'm responsible for this child, and I want to help them get to heaven. But there are a lot of parents that are like, I want this for you. I want
Yeah.
you to go to confirmation. I'm going to drop you off so you go to confirmation mass, but I'm never going to talk to you about it's not important for
Yeah,
me. And
for
for me,
sure.
and like to me, like I'm like, you're doing that child a real disservice.
Yeah, and that's probably, yeah, the inauthenticity is definitely like, yeah, they'll see right through that. um and also, like, if you want it enough for your child, you should want it enough for you. But I do see a lot of the same thing. I'm going to get my kid baptized in the faith, but I'm not a practicing, or like, yeah, I want this for you and not me. And my thing is, you're probably gonna, this is very blunt, but you're probably gonna die before your kid dies, right? It's very rare, and it's very rare for you to outlive your child. And so, do you want to meet him there? You want to meet them there? Like, that's, and I know it's like really intense, and I probably would not say that to someone in a conversation, but it's like, if you desire your child, you believe in heaven and you desire your child to get there, wouldn't you want to meet them? Like, so your soul is just as important, right? And in my like earth side view, and we can say earth side view because we're here right now, like, that seems very like, yeah, you would want to go to heaven, you don't want to, you want to meet them there. But like, when we also know theologically that when you're in heaven you don't desire anything, right? So if some of your loved ones aren't, there, you're not really going to care, because you are in the source of all desire and happiness. So like, you don't want for nothing, but you also have your memories and you can recognize other souls. And so it's like, so he's like, I see my family, I met this I knew who they were without speaking, because you don't have your mouth. Heaven's a whole concept I love to talk about, but it's one of those things. It's like, okay, yes, you think it's important and you want your kid to be in this faith denomination because you desire this for them, but you can also ask, like, do you just desire the ethical teachings? Do you desire like the moral tenets of the faith? If so, you don't have to be a Christian, you can just live those out, right? You don't have, like, that's another long hard look in the mirror. Like, you can live an ethical and moral life and not be a Christian. So just don't claim it and be inauthentic. Or if it's that important, figure out why and internalize that why. Do the work yourself in order to lead your family in the appropriate direction, or just make that call that, you know what, I don't buy into it, and you can still be an ethical and moral person. Will we desire all people to be united in Christ? Yes. Will it happen? No.
All right, Catherine, I have one more question for you, and that is, what do you talk to talk to the teen that's out there that's about to leave for college? They're like you, they grew up in a Catholic home in the Catholic community with a Catholic keep. Talk to them about some things that you would advise them based on your experience as they head off to college.
Yeah, I think the most important is knowing who you are. And I know that is hard, like generally speaking, but there's plenty of stuff online. Like, figure out ways to self reflect and what you believe, and even write a list who you are, the different qualities, characteristics, like full blown, like write a list of who you are, who you desire to be. It is going to be very difficult, especially if you're going to, public university, state school. Like, if you're not going to Ave Maria or Christendom or Belmont Abbey or Holy Angels, one of those schools, and I think there's only 23 on the list of there's like a list that are like, if you want to keep a Catholic identity, like these are the schools, and there's 221 Catholic schools, mind you, in America, and 23 of them would be, this is where you can keep your Catholic identity. So it's going to be very difficult. I don't even want to say next to impossible because that's harsh, but there are going to be a lot of influences in community that are going to be counter what you have been taught and counter Catholicism. Um, we're meant to be in community. We're meant to do this together. That's why the church is so beautiful. And when you are absent of the church and you are a standalone in a tidal wave, it's going to be very hard. So I guess my advice would be aware of that. Know who you are as you move forward into a new place with new experiences. Stay true to what you have been taught, and who you believe that you are. On the other side of things, you can also do practical things like looking up the nearest church to campus. If it's local, walking the campus, seeing where things are, looking online. Is there, a Newman Center there, or a Catholic community on campus? Who is the person to contact? Reaching out to them before you get there. Like a bunch of practical things. Finding, reaching out to an advisor or maybe a future professor or an RA, like having a contact there that has been there, whether it be an older student or an adult, and try to build a relationship before you get there. So there's, yeah, practical and spiritual. Obviously, continue praying for the parents of these kids leaving. Pray for them, fast for them. Get your church to be praying for them to remain steadfast in what they believe, especially if they're not going to one of those 23 super like Steubenvilles, yeah, so that's really important, and work with them beforehand on what they might experience. And I think that is huge. And that ties into even the your young people leaving the church. The statistic is 80% of all Catholics who leave the faith do so between the ages of 18 and 23. And obviously there's developmental reasons for that, but you can get ahead of it, right? Where situational, right? And my parents used to practice this with like fire drills or being lost in public, or if you're at a party and like people are drinking and you don't have a ride, like what do you do, right? Where do you go? Who do you call? Where do you meet? Like all of those things. And so I would think that it would be very beneficial if you have a young person who's either going to college or going away from the faith. It's like, okay, like let's kind of test the waters here. Like if you are in this situation, here are your options. And they might not want to talk to you, but post-it notes or like writing on mirrors, very successful when getting through to your teens. So even like on the refrigerator, you could do an example of you go to a concert and you're underage. Do you drink? Don't drink. And then you can even under that, like on the mirror on that night, be like, I drink, but I have one drink and I'm aware of everything that's going on. B, I get blacked out, don't know where I am, or just not even blacked out. I have too many drinks. I lose either my phone or the people I'm with. Like let them think through their own consequences, or you stay sober. And guess what? When the police show up, because they will, you don't get in trouble and you don't have to do a breathalyzer and all these things where it's like, okay, just help them think about. And even if they don't do the activity, they're still seeing the scenario, and somewhere in there, they're doing like what I would do. Okay. Like this is what I would do. So you can just present different things to them in different ways. It's like, all right, let's do a quick, like, if this happens, who do you call? Right. And have that game plan before they leave. And often when I'm writing my, notes to my seniors that graduate, I'm like, have a person that will pick up the phone. Make sure you have someone that knows you back home or there, like knows you and can give you solid advice that isn't speaking to the version that you portray yourself as, but is speaking to you, actually you. So, I think working with the science again, like, okay, you're going to probably partake in risky behavior, or you're going to be impulsive. You're not going to think things through. Before we get to that stage, okay, like to this day, I'm like, I know I go to the tree outside the house if there's ever a fire in the house and I'll meet my family there. Like, let it be that second nature, right? Let it be that second nature where it's like, okay, if I am at a party and I see someone with a gun, I immediately leave, right? It's not that hard. It's not that hard. Like, oh, it's someone on the other side of the park. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You see anyone with a weapon, you get out of there, right? So it's just like instilling that like at an early age. And it might sound crazy. Like it might sound crazy. If you would have told me at 16 years old, a junior in high school, that you will be at a party when someone has a weapon, I'd be like, why? Like, no one I know would have a weapon. Like, it happens and bad things can happen because of it. So even like presenting it like something like that, you're at a party, someone has a weapon, what do? You stay. Okay, if you stay, these things can happen, right? If you go, oh, you can go watch YouTube with your friends in your dorm for the next, whatever, 2 hour, 2+ hours. You can get it early to bed, like, just helping them see scenarios and outcomes before they happen, I think would be really beneficial to teens and to those that are walking away from the faith to like kind of keep those values and like instill some, common sense there still. All right.
Yeah.
I think I answered the question.
No, that's really good. I think about in work when I was doing sales, we always did simulated conversations.
Yes.
I love this activity. I would even ask my boss. I would have one-on-one conversations with him. I'm like, "Can we play this out?" It like seems super weird, but I'm like,
It
"Let's play.
seems
Let's
weird.
Let's play
Yes.
this out. Like you be this person, I'll be this person. Help me through this conversation and then give me advice afterwards. And I think those types of simulated conversations and experiences exactly what you're talking about, where you're not just talking through the scenario, you're actually like acting through it. And we do this all the time. Fire drills, for example, is
Right.
like you were talking about. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
it,
And
it-
even on top, like thinking through, a conversation with a stranger versus a friend, like, and so it's like, how are you going to get out of a situation if you're with someone you don't know versus how are you going to get out of a situation, with a friend? And I know it feels very, yeah, vague and broad when you're like getting out of a situation. Like, no, it'll come in handy where you're like, okay, I need to leave, but I don't want to be embarrassed or I don't want to like disrupt things. And so like making a phone call, like anything, like, oh, having a person that if you have a code word, they know to call you to say like leave. Like there are so many things that you could put in place before disaster strikes, before situations occur where you don't know what to do. And even if a situation occurs where you don't, there can be a plan for that. Like you don't know what to do. Okay, here are your next steps, right? Remove yourself immediately to get clarity of thought, right? Figure out what are the different, exit strategies or what could possibly go wrong. Or is this a safe place? If it's safe, you can return. If it's not, figure out how to get out of it, So there's just a bunch of different ways. And now with the technology we have today, location sharing, Uber, like all those things didn't exist when I was in college. So it's like there are a lot of good things that can come out of what we see as a little bit like overarching of our privacy. But like I think that there are a lot, again, good things that can come from that.
yeah. Yeah. The other thing that stood out to me, and it just leads me to one more question I want to ask you. So, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking to myself, man, and I've been thinking about this today actually with my kids. Like they don't want to hear me talk to them, like what but they do have some. They do need a lot of spiritual guidance. And I was like, man, you know what I really want to do with them? I really want to have them find someone or like me recommend someone that they can go to for a spiritual direction, right? And it might be a priest, it might be a deacon, it might be just a mature Christian person that's older than them,
Mhm.
right? And someone that can like grab them by the shoulders, like you said, and kind of like,
Mhm.
hey, this like what you're doing here is and someone that they can confide in and trust, and they're not going to tell me, that they do this, that, and the other, and
Yeah. Yeah.
so I think too, like, I would that so that's one thing, but it also brings me to this thing that you had talked about that you mentioned where you are, at your parish, you are teaching parents on how to
Mhm.
catechize their kids. Tell me more about that. I think there's probably a lot of churches that would be like, "Whoa, what is that? What does that look like?"
Yes. So it's fairly new, I want to say within the last 2 years, and they switched over to the faith formation being family based. I don't know if
Mm.
you've seen that, where it's like instead of Sunday school, there's a component of, religious education where the family does it together and they're supposed to like take it home and do the work together. But then they have like a separate thing for almost RCIA, but for Catholics already. Like they're already Catholic, and it's just catechizing them in a way that they may not have been catechized before. So just breaking down the faith in small, chunks. I think it's once a week. No, once a month. Maybe it should be once a week. I'll say that, but it's just saying like, okay, here's what the church teaches on this topic, and if you're, these are some common questions that the kids will raise and might tie into other aspects of the faith because everything is connected. So they'll just cover a topic and be like, this is, a way that you can explain it to this age versus this age versus this age. And so it honestly feels very RCIA, like if for people that are already Catholic, but it's needed, right?
Yeah.
Like it's still the problem of ministry in churches. It's the people that are doing it, right, are the ones that are showing up. So it's like, man, we really need to get, the goal is to get the Catholics that need it, but it's like, how do you, that's the question of the ages. So, but like the parents that are coming to these meetings and like doing faith formation with their kids, they care, right? They want to be better and they want to, lead their children in the faith as truthfully as possible and as authentically as possible for them. So yeah, it's interesting, it's new, but it's I don't know, I can't say the fruits of it yet, if you will, because it's still so new, but it seems like it's going well.
It's awesome. And hopefully it changes the culture, right? Like, I think that's part of it is that you have these scenario, like I think about it with my parish, my my pastor's like he's up there on Sunday, it's like Corpus Christi, and he's like,
Mhm.
stay for the processional and stay afterwards. Please don't drive off, like and everything. And sure enough, half the
Yeah,
people
yeah,
leave,
yeah,
and
right.
so but I think and I think a lot of teachers or people like we've been thinking about this starting something like this at our parish, and I think there's a lot of people that get discouraged at the thought of like, well, what if it dwindles down to you have three people that show up on, when we do this. But I think it's also about persisting through it to create a culture,
Mhm.
where people say, no, this is what we're going to do. There's a reason why Protestants have this kind of idea of, or like they have this kind of stigma among Catholics that they really know their Bibles because they go to Bible studies, they go to Sunday school, and they, like this, and
Mhm.
this is the culture that's created in these Protestant circles over decades and decades and decades. So hopefully, I just think that's awesome that you guys are doing this, and hopefully that will create a culture where the people that
Yeah,
need it.
creating a culture is difficult, and yeah, we could talk about that forever because just pastors coming and going, and I'm like, oh, we were just getting something good there. So yeah, it's the church, so there's pros and cons always, but yeah, it's a cool ministry, and I think ultimately it will lead to families, which you need like whole families coming closer as a unit and closer to the church community and closer to God. So, and that's all we can ask for.
Catherine, do you have, I know you do speaking around to different parishes and things like that.
Mhm.
How can people get in contact with you if they want you to come to their parish?
Oh well, that would be awesome. I'm actually, you can probably cut this. Oh, anyway, I'm telling you this. I'm doing a talk at Old Dominion. Did I tell you that I'm the
Hmm.
keynote speaker at a retreat in October? Yeah, I'm so excited for it. Anyway, but it's through email. Email would be great. So it's just Katherine period Mosco at gmail.com. And I'm on social medias, but I don't really use them for uh, work, I guess. It's just purely my personal social media page. But feel free if you want to follow me on Instagram. It's just Miss Mosco, MISSMOSCO. And then, yeah, Facebook, it's just Katherine Mosco, but I don't really post on there. So Instagram will probably be the best way to reach me if you desire to find me on social media.
Very cool. And I'll put links in the show notes so people can easily email you or find you on Instagram and invite you to a retreat or to their parish.
All right, that sounds great. Justin, thank you so much for having me. I was so nervous, but you are just so easy to talk to. And honestly, the Holy Spirit, He came through on those prayers because it is hard. It's hard sharing your story and it's hard, doing it justice. And so I thank you for your time and your energy and your questions. And I love how the Lord works in your life. It has been a pleasure to watch your whole conversion has been awesome, but the journey you're on now, post conversion, I mean, it's a daily conversion, but watching you now, hearing your podcasts, like just reading your writings is just, it's incredible. And I'm glad we're friends.
Catherine, that means the world to me. Thank you so much. I'm the one that's supposed to end by saying thank you for your thank you for your story. No, really, I honestly, I it's I I'll end by saying this. I did not have a great impression of Catholicism at our mutual school. I just, for whatever reason, I didn't. I think part of it was because it's so weird to me that Catholic schools hire non-Catholics and that, and they are trying to lead the culture. And I don't know. That's a story for another day. But, um, but there was something about you that I just found to be, I was like, and I know that you were still working through your own stuff. But I think it's amazing to watch the Holy Spirit just work in people's lives and turn lives around and convert people. And your story is so beautiful and wonderful because Jesus is at the center of it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I like him there, so.
Thank you so much for joining me. Wow, what a story of a prodigal daughter. So many of us think that the answers to life are found in rebelling against our religious upbringing. I know the word deconstruction is popular these days. But when we find ourselves back in the arms of Jesus, it's a lot like coming home. We find who we truly are. I love the message that Katherine shared today. If you'd like to have Katherine speak at an event or a retreat, please reach out to her. I've included her email and Instagram in the show notes. Once again, let me offer my heartfelt thanks to Katherine for joining me on Why Catholic, and let me thank you as well for watching or listening today. I pray God's blessings on you.